Thank you, Acting Deputy Speaker. I thank the member for Lindsay for proposing this motion about the NDIS. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is the biggest reform in this space and is something which is really making a difference to the lives of Australians living with a disability. And it's incumbent on us as lawmakers to make the scheme as user-friendly and cost-effective as possible. I would genuinely acknowledge the staff of the NDIA and the Assistant Minister Prentice for help with issues that my office raises every day. We field calls from concerned caregivers and participants and providers, and their assistance allows us to find solutions. However, after over 2 years of NDIS packages in my part of southwest Sydney, we do need to look at ways of improving the interaction and outcomes for people that are supported by the NDIS. Both providers and participants are raising issues about the bureaucratic nature of the plans. Those waiting for reviews of their plans are currently waiting up to 6 months or more without feedback or information about what is happening or the process being undertaken. Information will help them deal with the stress of waiting and not knowing what will happen next. One of my constituents, Duncan, has emailed me with feedback about the NDIS last week. Duncan is an advocate for his son and has contacted my electorate office on many occasions for advice and support. Last year's package was too low. Although this has been remedied with an increase in his son's package this year, he is still finding navigation of the process difficult, especially around the way funding is allocated to subcategories without taking on the feedback of the recipient or their carer. He recently needed to contact me again to provide feedback about the experiences with 2 service providers. For the first service provider, the family used the NDIS website to obtain the details. After visiting them, it became obvious they had no experience or insight for mentally disabled people like his son. When it became apparent they were not the right fit for Duncan's son, the service agreement was discontinued. However, the provider had already quarantined a large portion of his son's funds, and it took months of negotiation to have them released. The next service provider had an hour meeting with Duncan, provided a report, but used 11 hours of the sessions in the service agreement to write and research this report rather than see his son. As a consequence, all funds are now exhausted and nothing has helped his son. More importantly, this wasn't discussed with Duncan when the agreement was made. I quote Duncan correctly: "I doubt that I'm alone in these type of incidents. I have a university degree and over 30 years in the education sector. I find it very difficult to understand the procedures and rules and classifications of the NDIS. I've read many pages of information, rang many times, gone into the office and asked questions and still make mistakes with the NDIS. I can only try not to repeat them." Duncan is certainly not alone with these type of incidents. I'm aware of another recipient who's been provided services even though the service provider was well aware the child had not been approved and now has a $15,000 debt. Duncan has asked me to raise these suggestions of his to improve the NDIS with the Minister responsible. Employ more qualified staff, provide useful and accessible plain English information, remove categories and revisit service agreements. Both business and clients should be protected. They are not only concerns from recipients and their caregivers about the operation of the NDIS. I've also had representations from many of the service providers in my electorate, especially Macarthur Disability Services, who are finding the system difficult to navigate and also finding that it doesn't support advocacy or ways in helping people, particularly with mental illness, access their plans. They've raised concerns about realistic funding and for transport costs as well, and also other issues too numerous for me to mention here. The NDIS is a great reform and it's certainly a bipartisan reform for our country, but now is the time to listen to the feedback and improve on the foundations that have been made. We have to ensure that we provide choice and support to those who are most vulnerable in our society when and how they need it.
I thank the member for Wirra.